Everyone who's just arriving, you will see on your screen that there are instructions of how to obtain interpretation services for today. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a globe, an icon of a globe. Please click on the globe and choose your preferred language. Okay. Para toda aquella persona que va a usar servicios de interpretación para hoy, van a ver abajo en su pantalla un icono del globo. Hazle clic y por favor escoja su idioma de preferencia para hoy. Toda persona tiene que escoger un lenguaje, un idioma.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
For those of you who are not familiar with CPAC, the Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center, we are a statewide nonprofit organization that is designated as Connecticut's Parent Training and Information Center under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And I'm going to turn it over to Sean and Ada to introduce themselves and their role in all of this.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sean Cronin. I work in the Bureau of Special Education, and I also work around restraint and seclusion with Ada. So I do dispute resolution in the Bureau of Special Education. And as I said before, I work with Ada around restraint and seclusion issues. So Ada, I'll have you introduce yourself.
Thank you, Sean and Jen. I'm Ada Kavachi-Kuma. I actually work in the performance office for the State Department of Ed, and I deal primarily with data and the current system, so CT STADs. That's pretty much where most of my time is spent, and then a few other things. But in regards to restraint and seclusion, Sean and I work closely with a couple other colleagues from both a data perspective and then just overall in the restraint and seclusion world.
Thank you. So today's session is informational only and should not be considered legal advice. Today's session will be recorded and posted on CPAC's YouTube channel. We have a special playlist that will have all three of the webinars from the series in English and in Spanish available, and we'll email that out to all of the registrants for this. And this webinar really aims to provide accurate and objective information about the current laws in Connecticut related to restraint and seclusion. And today, actually, we're going to be also talking about some of the best practices around communication. Since it is a public forum and we are recording it, it's not really a place to talk about individual cases, but if you do need individual assistance, CPAC is available and you can contact us at cpacinc.org or call 860-739-3089 to speak with a trained parent consultant. And we do have a lot of information to get through today, so we're going to try to get through the content first, and then if we have extra time at the end, we'll go through any questions that are put in the chat. We might use some of these acronyms today where they'll be referred to a lot throughout this series. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we just wanted you to be able to take a look at them before we start our presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to, yes, the slides will be accessible after. We will email them to you. And I'm going to turn it over to Sean.
So the first thing we're going to talk about is documentation requirements for restraint and seclusion. Incident reports include such items as, and this is not a comprehensive list, the nature of the emergency, because when it comes to restraint and seclusion, a child can only be restrained or secluded if it's an emergency situation. Attempts at de-escalation, detailed description of the nature of the restraint or seclusion, and the duration of the incident. As far as restraint and seclusion notice to parents, the district must attempt to notify the parents or parent of a student who has been restrained or secluded on the day of or within 24 hours after the emergency use of a restraint or a seclusion. The contact must be made by phone, email, or other method of communication, which may include sending a note home with the child. And then a copy of the incident report to the parent must be sent no later than 2 business days after the incident. On this slide, we've included the laws related to parental notification, and people will be getting a copy of these slides, and these are actually hyperlinked. So if you click on them, you'll be able to go right to all of the laws related to restraint and seclusion. It will bring you right to the laws related to restraint and seclusion and parental notification. Other requirements related to the use of restraint and seclusion for both general education and special education students, each local or regional board of education, and each institution or facility operating under contract with a local or regional board of education must record each instance of the use of physical restraint or seclusion on a student, and specify the nature of the emergency that necessitated the use of such physical restraint or seclusion. So it has to be clear what the emergency was that necessitated the use of physical restraint or seclusion. There has to be a reason why it occurred and what was the emergency that necessitated it. I believe it's Ada now who will be speaking about our forms.
So as Sean mentioned, the incident, so once an incident has occurred, not only is the notification to the parent either done initially through, it could be a phone call or an email or a note sent home, but the documentation for both that either restraint or seclusion is put in a report. That report is currently available once it's completed in our system in CTSEDS. And this is just an example of a student that we have in the training site that we use. As you can see, Kate Pear is not a real student, just for everybody so they understand. And this is the top portion of the report. So this is where you will see the student's name, a SASD, so that identifiable number, that state identifiable number, an incident code, which is for just system purposes, where the incident location, so did it occur in the school, did it occur somewhere else? And then you will see some additional information. So the date of the incident, when it was entered, the start and the end time, and the duration of that restraint. So some of these things Sean already talked about, that it's a minimum of some of the requirements based on the law. So you will also see in the report who has administered that restraint. So who was involved, and then who, from a staffing perspective, who witnessed and monitored the restraint. And same exact thing with the seclusion, we're going to see that. What were the circumstances of the restraint, what type of restraint, and then also regarding the incident injury, if there was an injury. And so all of these you will see in that top portion of the report.
Can I interject here for a second too,
Please.
Ada? One of the things that we do monitor in our reports also is that staff are certified to administer a restraint or seclusion. We have a checkoff box whether or not staff are certified. And so that's also something that we monitor related to restraint or seclusion.
While it's not necessarily that something, so it's not something that you will see in the report in the physical PDF, or if it's printed in that printed document, it is something that when staff are entering this information, it does ask for that indication if whoever administered the restraint or the seclusion was certified to be able to do so. Thank you, Sean. Laura, thank you. So the next portion of the report goes into more details as to what precipitated the incident. So what was the activity or behavior of the student? And this is, in the system, it is just a text box. So this is where some of that detail comes into play as to why it resulted in that emergency restraint or seclusion. And then the next piece that it asks for is the staff activity or response to what was happening with that student. And then some of the other questions that it talks about is, did the student demonstrate physical distress during the restraint and seclusion? Some of these are just check boxes in the report versus others are text boxes to provide that additional information. And then also how did the incident terminate? So how did it end? I don't know, Sean, if you want to add anything else in regards to what staff should be at least putting in, or?
I think, you know, one of the things that we want to look at things such as de-escalation methods, you know, if there was a BIP or any type of a functional behavioral assessment, how were those kind of incorporated into some of the de-escalation methods? What was kind of being used? What was used beforehand before it entered into a restraint or seclusion? We want to make sure, how was it an emergency? Like, how did it reach the point of an emergency? We want to always make sure that restraint and seclusion was only used in the case of an emergency. So that's what we want to make sure as far as that's concerned.
And then the last portion of the report talks about notification and next steps. So in the top portion of it, you will have how was the parent notified? So what was that original notification method? So the phone call, and then the delivery of the incident report. And then one of the bigger pieces that I think is so important, as especially parents are reading these reports, it's going to be the school will take the following actions. So what are those next steps? What's happening after this restraint? Is there a PPT that will meet, that will convene? Is there staffing that needs to come back together and discuss further steps? Is there additional training that's needed? Whatever it is, this is where that information will be. It's that last portion of that last question there, the following actions. So we have selected a couple of examples from the checkbox that's currently, the checkboxes that are currently available on the report. I don't know, Sean and Jen, if you guys wanted to add anything else, because I know when we had originally spoken about, Jen, I know you had some from a parent perspective or a CPAC perspective.
Yeah, I think I'll add when I get to my slides, that way I'm
Perfect.
not redundant on what I'm going to say.
So similar to the restraint, this is the seclusion, very much is similar for the most part. It's actually the same format. So this is the top portion of it. You will find the same information as far as the student demographic information, name, SACID, and then the incident date, when the report was completed, the start and end date of that seclusion, the duration of that seclusion, the staff administering and witnessing the seclusion, the circumstances of the seclusion, and then incident injury. Laura, I'm gonna go through these probably a whole lot faster since we sort of reviewed them. And then the next portion is very much what exactly, so that same thing, student activity and behavior precipitating the incident, and then staff activity and response. So, and then if it was monitored by the staff and that information. So for this example, we actually did select a couple of different choices that are available. So for notification method, we put in that it was a verbal notification in person versus the previous one that was a phone call. And then the same exact thing under the school will take the following actions. As you can see, I'd mentioned previously, the PPT will convene to review revised IEP, convene a crisis team meeting. So these are some of the additional checkboxes that are available or selections that are available when staff are completing the report.
The next piece we're talking about is reports of injury. So when there's instances of injury, whether they're serious or non-serious, associated with the use of restraint or seclusion, they must be reported to us within 2 business days via CT SEDS. So prior to CT SEDS, and we used to have an old data submission report system. There used to be paper reports, but we stopped using that as of July 2019. And so we no longer take paper reports for injury within the Bureau of Special Education. So those no longer required as of 2019. So CSDE staff, specifically I do, review all reports of serious injury. So anytime a serious injury is reported to us, we'll review the details of that serious injury. Then if a serious injury did occur, per statute, refer that serious injury report to Disability Rights Connecticut and also to the Office of the Child Advocate here in Connecticut. So serious injury is an injury that requires medical attention beyond that which would be included in the category of routine first aid. Examples of such medical attention include an emergency department visit, an emergency medical technician call, sutures, diagnostic x-rays to determine fractures, or placement in casts. Non-serious injuries include red marks, bruises or scrapes that required a Band-Aid or an application of basic first aid.
So the report portion, so the actual report does have the incident injury details. There's a couple in those cases where there is a serious injury, and here's some of the examples that you could see in that portion of the report. So as staff are completing the report, if there is a serious injury, there's additional fields that have to be completed. So these are those fields. So in those cases of like if there's a bite mark, bruises, red marks, and then it will ask further details as to that basic first aid, the location of the injury on the student body, the location where it happened in the school where the student was injured. So classroom versus hall versus somewhere else, playground, wherever that is, or any other location. And then Laura, the next, thank you. So then the incident injury details portion, quite a bit of this is also, it's a checkbox. This is after there was quite a bit of research and analysis that was done in previous years' reports. And this is why it has sort of boiled down to the ones that were actually used in over 5 or 6 years, I believe, Sean, you, Diane, and Laura had worked on. And then also you do have, when filling this out, there are portions of this report that will have that text box for that additional information. So the description of self-injurious behavior or accidental event that resulted in the injury does have a box that you can actually go in and provide that additional information. And then one of the other portions of the report that will ask questions about the reporting agency or the school investigating the incident, if there is anything further that requires investigation, and what is the status of that investigation.
One of the things we wanted to include is many schools have samples of their policies on restraint and seclusion right on their website. And this is an example of a school that does a district. So Trumbull, I wanted to pull this off of one of the district's websites, gave us permission to kind of use this as an example. Right on their website, they have a sample of all of their restraint and seclusion policies right on websites. So parents have access to that. They could go right on their website and look at their restraint and seclusion policies if they wanted to look them up. So it's easy access for parents to understand what the policies and procedures are related to restraint and seclusion. Jen, this is you now.
It is. Thank you, Sean and Ada, for laying the foundation for us. Now that we've covered what we have to report, the compliance piece of the reports, we want to talk about some different but equally important aspects of that. And it's really related to the quality of the information that we have in our reports to help inform the school team and the family of what happened and help them plan, and also the communication of the actual incident with the families. Go to the next slide, Laura. So we don't just do these reports for the sake of compliance. We're really hoping that we're filling reports out in a way that's useful for the teams to help understand, the context of the incident, what strategies were used that were helpful or not helpful, and helping identify patterns. If say if there's a student who has experienced multiple restraints and seclusions, there you might be able to identify a pattern if the reports are filled out in a way that is clear, concrete, thorough, for all team members to be able to understand. So the student, again, should be at the center of this, not the compliance piece. The compliance piece is just where we start. So we really want to be able to focus on quality information. So I've seen, in different reports, we have families call us that look for help to understand what's written in the report. And sometimes there will be very vague descriptions of strategies that were used. And it would be more helpful if they were able to see like what actual strategies. So instead of saying implemented behavior intervention plan or use strategies in the IEP, to have specific examples that the team can use. Go to the next slide. So communicating through challenges, it's natural human instinct, I think, to kind of pull away when we're faced with challenging conversations. And in situations like restraint and seclusion, it's actually important for communication with families not to decrease, but to actually increase. This slide came again from a lot of the experiences of our families who expressed that is all of a sudden, communication had really dropped significantly and they didn't feel like they understood what was going on, or maybe they were requesting data or specific information and the teacher may not have known the answer, so they waited to share the information with them, and that caused a lot of anxiety and stress for them. You can go to the next slide. So again, we went over what the current statutory requirements are for reporting to families on the same day or within 24 hours. And then phone, email, note home in the student's backpack. But we also wanted to have you consider some other additional considerations. So calling as soon as the emergency restraint or seclusion is finished and the student is safe, rather than taking the whole 24 hours. and also take into consideration family preference for notification via a call, in person, email, or a note home. And we talk about this, our families really have diverse needs, you know, whether it's language, literacy, their work schedules. So it's really important to know your families, know the information that's important to them, and to be able to communicate effectively with them and to build trust. So, and a lot of these examples, it may seem like it's common sense, but we thought it was worth sharing because, again, I think and I have to clarify too, like at CPAC, we get questions from people who are having, you know, problems or challenges, not the people that are having, you know, good experiences. So that is just a disclaimer there, but these are real things that families have had to deal with. And I know like they appreciate the students' current safety and well-being is the first thing they want to know. So don't start, you know, maybe not starting with a restraint happened, but you know, I've always appreciated when the school nurse calls me and says, don't worry, everything's okay. And then, you know, starts with, you know, what we're going to talk about. And, you know, parents might have an emotional response to the notification. And it can be really easy to take that personally and to be defensive about that. But it's their child, and it's natural for them to have an emotional response, and compassion and respect really go a long way. You might have a really good trusting relationship with your families, but it's still a difficult topic to talk about. Parents should be notified in their language. Again, that's a thing that our parents have told us they don't have access to, and it's really important that they're notified in their language, and that whoever talks about the report with them, if you need an interpreter, that you have somebody there who can actually answer questions, so not just to read the report, because if you have somebody that's just interpreting what's written there, they can't ask questions like a English speaking family might be able to do. And parents should know when to expect the full report and who they can contact if they have questions or concerns. You know, some teams might have a point person who might be in charge of that communication. A lot of families want to know, am I getting it in CT SEDS? Are you going to send it home in the backpack? So simple things like that can help ease a lot of anxiety and build trust with families. And for ongoing communication, really having a plan with parents' input and considering their individual needs. So again, is there a point person from the team, and how can that parent best reach them? Do they have a preference for communication, such as a call versus email? Is there a specific information that is important to the parent? And you know, for example, like some parents, the data is really important. They want to see behavioral data. Maybe they're interested in knowing about the aggressive behavior or self-injurious behavior on a daily basis, or maybe their child is non-speaking and they ask for more information than another parent may ask because their child can't tell them anything. Is there an anticipated schedule for sharing data and updates? And is there information that would be helpful for the family to share with the school team? So, you know, sometimes there are things, you know, whether it's changes in schedule, changes in medications, or anything that could impact, you know, what's happening at school, that the school team might think is important for the family to share with them as well. So we're going to have a few minutes for questions, but I did want to do a plug for our session, which is actually next Wednesday. We're going to have a BCBA come, a board certified behavioral analyst come from Stonington School District and talk about applying functional behavioral assessment results to inform function-based prevention. So we've covered the law, we've covered documentation, requirements, and communication. And then next we want to talk about using this information to help us plan for students and to help prevent restraint and seclusion. And before we go to questions, I do want to just put these resources out here for you. Again, if you need individual assistance, you have the Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center and the Bureau of Special Education call center that you can call. And for districts, you have your bureau consultant that you can call as well. And Jovi, you were saving the questions that came up in the chat.
I
All right,
just reposted them into the chat.
All right, thank you. So I'll read these off. So why doesn't the report to parents contain the information regarding staff being certified or not?
So the way we designed the report, the only people who should be conducting any type of restraint or seclusion should be certified. And that's how the report was designed. Anytime that someone who, we rarely have that incident occur, where someone who, if someone conducts a restraint or seclusion is not certified, they have to get certified annually to be a part of the crisis intervention team. If we find out that someone is not certified, then we reach out to the district to say what happened here, what occurred. That occurred on one occasion where someone wasn't certified and we had to follow up with the district, but it rarely occurs. And I agree with you. It's something that we could look into adding that information into a report, but it's not something that occurs frequently.
Thank you, Sean. So the next question is there an updated definition or parameters for what constitutes as physical distress?
Ada, I know we track physical distress on the form. I don't know, and is the student in physical distress? Is there a guidance? Is there guidance related to physical distress on the form?
No, there isn't. That was what I was looking for. If there wasn't that individual I that expands and gives additional information. So we can definitely take that one back to make sure that there is a definition there as to what that would constitute physical distress.
Yes, thank you. And I will share that, families have, expressed concern that that can be subjective as to whether the student was in distress. If a student goes home and tells their parent they couldn't breathe and they were scared, and the report doesn't indicate that, or it says there was no physical distress, that can be a challenge for families to try to work through that with you. Okay, so the next question, please clarify certification for all attendees. Certified means trained, correct? You are not referring to certified as meaning holding a certification credential for teaching. Paraprofessionals attend PMT certification and are allowed to be a member of the PMT team if they attend the training.
So when we're talking about, in order to do a restraint or seclusion, they have to receive annual certification and be a part of the crisis team, the crisis intervention team, identified by the school, or they have to receive their annual training. Well, however it works. If they're part of an approved private special education program, they have to receive their annual training in PMT or crisis intervention to do restraint and seclusion. Minimally, they have to receive their training annually to do restraint and seclusion. Whatever training that is, the school itself decides on the specific training related to restraint and seclusion, but they have to receive their annual training and it has to be documented that minimally on an annual basis, their training is updated. It's not certification related to their credential. It's the training related to restraint and seclusion.
Thank you, Sean.
Yep.
All right, so the next question, what are the rules or guidance related to injuries that surface after the incident? For example, the student needs medical attention after they go home, either on the same day or on a following day.
So that's a difficult one. So that could potentially mean If it was documented that the student was injured during the school day and it required follow-up medical attention, that would qualify as a serious injury. And should be documented as such as a serious injury. If the student was restrained or secluded, but it wasn't considered a serious injury, they didn't see any type of an injury during the restraint or seclusion, and it was just documented as a typical restraint or seclusion, then the student had medical issues following that. It was post that, and they ended up going for medical treatment. They should follow up with the school and let them know that, my student had issues and it was related to the restraint or seclusion, and see how the school relates to that. What ends up happening with that? The parent should let the staff know at the school that it occurred. And there should be some meeting related to that. I'm not sure how the staff would respond to that, because again, the parents would have to, and the school would have to come to agreement that occurred during school hours. So there would be a back and forth related to that as to coming to an agreement. The parents could then submit to our office to doing investigation if there's not agreement. So we could do a complaint investigation related to the restraint or seclusion.
So here's a clarification. And so Tom, this was your question. Did you mean in regards to how do you document that something was a serious injury after the fact? Meaning you've completed the report, it's finalized in the system. Because see, Sean went at it from a different perspective. I'm thinking about it from how do you document it in the system now that it is a serious injury? Maybe it wasn't a serious or wasn't thought to be a serious injury before. Now it falls under because there additional medical assistance was required, so on and so forth. So I don't know if that was the question or if it was just from a technical perspective or from a non-technical. Yes, please.
Okay. No, thank you for that. I appreciate it. No, it's a little bit of both actually. And I think, Sean hit on some of it and you're hitting on some of it. I think it's a combination of, because we've heard from parents, right? Like later on, we had to bring them to the doctor. Later on, this happened. And then like, it's in this limbo and then they don't know, and it didn't really get reported. They don't know how it got reported, et cetera. Because again, I think parents are hopefully woefully unaware of these obligations because they don't experience this very often. So hopefully they're not really aware of this stuff in one respect, right? But so yeah, that's questions we get like, hey, this happened. My student got, we had to go later, and then I don't know what the follow-up was, sort of a thing. So I think I was just curious what the guidance was from State Department or from the forums or from whatever process is involved to districts and those people that are doing them to how to handle that. And again, I appreciate Sean's comments on, the follow-up meetings and those sorts of things. I don't know if that's guidance that gets in front of those folks that are, on the ground or not. So that's kind of what it was about.
One of the things I would say is definitely, the more communication with the district or even the APSEP, wherever the student is located, the better. If there's follow-up medical intervention and, it's related to a restraint or seclusion, the more communication you're having with the school or the district, the better. Especially if it's related to a restraint or seclusion, you want to have that back and forth because the student was injured. So how can it be prevented? It wasn't documented. It occurred during some type of an intervention. So what can we do to do better in the future? And this occurred. So what can we do to make sure that it's documented and it doesn't happen again?
And so from a documentation perspective, if in the system, there is the ability to modify the original report and it creates that 0.1. So if you saw in that first slide at the top, like at the top portion with the student name, it gives an incident code. When it's modified, it becomes a 0.1. If it's modified again, it becomes a 0.2 and so on and so forth. But that's showing that it was modified from the original in case there was something wrong with the original or in case of the parent came back and said, nope, this actually, I brought my child to the doctor. Here's the note, here's everything it precipitated from what happened at school yesterday, or so on and so forth. So that's how that portion would get documented. And if it was a serious injury, then Sean gets notified, and
we reach
there's
out
more.
to the district. Yeah, we'll reach out to the district. We'll see, you know, if it was working. I mean, what worked, what didn't work, you know, things along those lines.
Thank you. And there's another question. I'm gonna paraphrase it a little bit differently, so it's not so specific, but a question about if you think your child was wrongly put in restraint and seclusion, it was not imminent danger, what parent rights are there and what are next steps that they should take?
You went in and out, Jen. I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. So if a parent believes their child was wrongly put in restraint or seclusion and it wasn't imminent danger or emergency situation, what rights do they have as a parent? What could be next steps that they take?
So one of the things that we do have is, you know, with restraint and seclusion, because it's a state statute, parents always have the right to file a state complaint. And we would do an investigation related to any issues related to restraint and seclusion. So that's something that we would do here in the state. The other thing I would say is that in district, if they wanted to, they could always contact their director of special education and, you know, have that conversation if they feel, if they have that relationship and they wanted to continue that relationship, have that conversation saying, I don't feel like this was appropriate, and see if there could be some solution rectified there. And also possibly even going to PPT to have that conversation. So those are a few options I would recommend.
Thank you, Sean. Okay, so another question, other than physical distress, should we record anything about a student's behavior during a prolonged restraint or seclusion? Example, given level of escalation, aggressive behaviors, etc.
So a few things that I like to see on restraint and seclusion is interactions that staff had that helped the student de-escalate, things that they had done or things that the student may have been escalating to. So even though he was in restraint or seclusion, are there things that made the student escalate more? So that you have historical information to go back to, so that it may not, something that may or may have worked, may not have worked, so that you have that as a reference point in the future that other staff can refer to too. Just some things that may be helpful.
Thank you, Sean. And I'm in looking at that question, I'm wondering about that, would that kind of information be in that precipitating event part, you know, that we would include that information as to, you know, why it was imminent danger. So not necessarily other parts of the report, but that could be a spot where that could be recorded.
Right.
Right. Another question, how often do schools admit that a student exhibited physical distress? So like what percentage is reported, I think is the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure of that. That's a good question. I'd have to look at our data and get some information on that.
Right, thank you. Question 8, is there a time frame you would need to request an investigation? So whoever asked that question, are you asking if there's like a time limitation on when you can file a complaint?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a 1-year look back time frame. So any state complaint is a 1-year look back time frame.
All right, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Great questions, everyone. I'll just give you another second and see if anybody has anything. Oh, thank you. And thank you, Ada and Sean.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.